So welcome to Pitfalls in Technology Selection for non-technical people. So my name is Jeff Labonski. I'll be giving a talk today. Hopefully I won't bore anybody too much. There'll be a QA session at the end if you'd like to ask any questions. But without any further ado, let's begin. Real quick, if anybody, silence, if that'd be great. Just a quick reminder, unless it come up again. So this talk was originally called Technology Selection without the pitfalls part. And as I was refining it more and more, it started to get more and more about the problems that I've run into professionally in my career that people should be aware of. And so the talk itself morphed more into pitfalls to avoid being a little bit too on the pessimistic side. We'll get into some of these things that I'd like to share with you, things that I've run into, things that should be in all of our minds as we pick things out of a technology hat to implement and make solutions out of. Just things that you should be aware of, that these can go sideways rather quickly and kind of pop off the rails. So what I'm going to be talking about today, there's no secret formula, there's nothing special. You're not going to come out with a 5-step plan to success. There's no definitive formula to any of this stuff. But if there was, it looks something like that. I'm a software engineer by trade, sorry. I'll try to keep this as much as a high level as possible. So as I said, there's really nothing going to be terribly prescriptive about this. I'm not going to be doing anything that will hopefully not blow your minds too much. But nothing can be totally prescriptive. And if you get into that area, somebody's claiming that something covers 100% of the cases, they're selling CIMM or an ISO standard, and you can pick them up for 15 volumes at $5,000 each, but that's not what we're going to be talking about today. And so just a quick disclaimer, this is going to be talking through the prism of software engineering, which is what my background predominantly is. Not to say I don't like hardware, I'm a big fan of Nutanix and the hyper-converged, kind of keeping an eye on it and stuff, but not going to be talking about it a whole lot today on the hardware side. So anyway, who I am. My name is Jeff Labonski. I'm a consultant at Chariot Solutions. I've done way too many local Philadelphia startups in my career. I kind of got into the scene back in '98. I've done a ton of startups. I've worked for a couple of Fortune 100s in the area. I've owned 2 consulting companies, and I've actually served as CTO for 4 local startups in the region. So it's an awful lot of fun. I highly recommend it if anybody has the opportunity. And so let's talk a little bit about technology selection. And technology right now, it's an inescapable aspect of our daily lives. There's nothing we can do or say to get away from it. Perhaps maybe running away. And I knew a guy famously became a sheep farmer and just fled and went to Montana, and he did it. He just pulled completely out, and that was his deal. But pretty much all of us, we're stuck with technology on a day-to-day basis. And it's completely inescapable. Even the Amish worry about their cell phone minutes. So this was taken down at Reading Terminal Mart downtown. So actually the Amish can buy and use cell phones quite well. So when you know that you have a lot in common with an Amish baker about what you're picking for your technology and communication strategy, the technology is really completely pervasive. You can't get away from it. And unfortunately, a lot of the things I'm talking about today are going to be falling back to this idea. I'm trying to impart a sentiment defer to you. And it may not look like it, but I used to be a big fan of fencing. And sentiment defer is the French term for understanding the blade. And so this is Capoferro, if anybody's interested. Great guy. Highly recommend him. You start to understand your opponent. You start to understand your match through the extension of the sword itself, what you're trying to do. And it becomes almost a supernatural, not telekinesis, but understanding of what's going on in the match in your opponent. And this just comes through experience and through time. And this is applicable to almost every aspect in our daily lives that you spend time with. So you've all done this. This is not a secret art that's magic to one particular thing. I'm sure you've all driven before. And if you're driving down the highway, you look over to your one lane to the right, and there's somebody, and you can tell they're going to dive into your lane. They're telegraphing this to you. So there's a communication that you're not even aware of. And sure enough, that guy's an idiot, dives right into your lane, cuts you off. But you can tell, you can smell this, you can see this. So a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is some of the areas that I bumped into that I want to try to impart this idea to you so that you can come forewarned and forearmed when making some of these selections in the field. And speaking of which, there is actually in software engineering the idea of code smells, which sounds very funny, but it is actually a real technique. And you can buy books on it, people have published journals on it. So things have a certain perception, a certain smell to them. And for people who have perhaps not done a whole lot of technology selection or have gotten too deep into it, a lot of this stuff seems like magic. but it's just a whole lot of time and experience, of which I'd like to impart a little bit to you today. Again, this is not a transformative talk. I'm not going to be turning you from this into this. So we'll just be doing this one step at a time, and we'll go from there. So one of the unfortunate things about technology, and I'm going to try to keep everything on a high level, is we can't talk about technology without talking about some of the tech underneath it. So I'm going to try to keep it as high as possible, but it's an unfortunate aspect of life that you can't discuss a thing without really knowing a thing a little bit. And as we all know, flying is easy, right? Just buy a plane, you go someplace. It's pretty darn simple. There's not a whole lot of technical aspects to it. I just need to get from A to B. Software is equivalently as difficult. Actually, no, I'm lying. Software is way more difficult. So software engineering is the single most, I'm going to read this slide, it's the single most complex endeavor that we have undertaken as a species, full stop. Pyramids are easy. You just get a bunch of guys, a whole bunch of beer. You don't even need pulleys. Software is just really, really hard, and all the technology associated with it. For instance, Windows 7's class diagram doesn't fit in 3 dimensions. If you've ever seen part of it, it's huge. So it's a bit of a rough ride, but it's going to be an awful lot of fun and very rewarding. So let's start. So let's talk about some of the aspects that affect technology selection. Predominantly one is budget. And this is simple because everybody's familiar with it. At least I hope so. Budget moves the earth. And admittedly, this is now an excellent time for you to get to know and befriend your local CFO or comptroller. They're fantastic people, overworked. They're viewed as antagonistic. They're viewed as potentially a negative. They have odd decision reasons, and you're not really sure what's happening, much like software and technology. So they're in the same boat that we are generally as professionals, but you can actually gain a lot by making a bit of an outreach and talking to your CFO, talking to your controller, saying hi, and so on and so forth. It's one of the most rewarding relationships that I've made in almost all of my companies, is being close to people who control the purse strings. So this is one of the first steps that you should always do, is be nice to people in general. So without a budget, there's very little that you can actually do. So this is relatively self-evident, but not necessarily. So I've actually worked for a number of startups, as I've mentioned, and you can do things without a budget. It's technically possible. It's really, really bad. So well after where the runway ends, there's a gravel and glass path that you can push yourself across. It's really painful and embarrassing for almost everybody involved, but it is technically possible to do that. I'm speaking from experience, you can do it. But first off, it's better to have money. That does make things a lot easier. So everybody should be familiar with something along these lines. It's the triumvirate of pretty much everything in life. If you've been to any of the finer diners or barbecue joints in their area, you'll start seeing signs kind of like this. If you want it fast and cheap, it ain't going to be good. So same deal. So this is the platonic ideal of almost every human endeavor. So you cannot achieve all 3 simultaneously. It is not possible, at least not currently. So usually you get to pick 2 and deal with it from there. So as I said, this is a platonic ideal. You don't necessarily need to pick 2. You can pick 1. And frankly, actually, I've seen projects where they've picked none. So I'm serious. You can. It's not necessarily by intent, but they have. So I've actually seen $1 billion website. It's very nice, but it did cost $1 billion US. So private, not public either. It was a private company. So you can actually have none of these things and keep on trucking. So in general, coming back with the budget, know your TCO. I know everybody's all interested in TCA now, but TCO still is the operating thing that makes the world go around. It's cliche, but TCO really is what drives almost all the processes attached to the budget and gets you what you want to do. The thing to keep in mind with TCO and why it's a useful exercise is that there's all kinds of things that go weird with TCO. So one of the more fun things, and most of us have probably bumped into this now since everything's gone to a service, is these hidden stackable prices. So my favorite friends over at Salesforce.com, I'm sure I'll get a couple nods and giggles. Once you get past N people in the system, it jumps hilariously very, very high. So suddenly you start saying, well, Bill doesn't really need to log in. You can just enter his numbers for him, right? Yeah, so just send him over a paper and then he'll figure it out. So just always keep an idea once you grow to a certain size, sometimes there's these really hilarious jumps in prices and associated support along with it. Other things to keep in mind, cost per event support. A lot of places ding you per incident, and they'll ding you hard for it. Or response window. It's all fun and games until something's down on Monday morning at 8 and your tech support doesn't wake up for 3.5 hours on the West Coast. And they're going to be rubbish in Monday morning anyway. So keep an idea for cost of experts in licensing. Oracle's pretty easy. You can kind of spin around in a circle and knock 2 or 3 Oracle consultants out of the woodwork. Some of the more esoteric platforms, you're going to be paying for flights, you're going to be paying for hotels, you're going to be paying for meals and a per diem and. So ask me how I know. I bumped into that, and that's a pretty expensive bill there. And one of the things is bizarre licensing. And this is one of the areas that's really, really insidious, and it's popping up, and it's actually running right now. There's some fun drama going on in the news right now. Just for instance, I'm going to harp on a few companies, but I love them to death. Anybody from Microsoft, I apologize. Microsoft License 2.0 is terribly complex, and to the point where most of their licensees don't know what they should own, and they're not sure if they're in compliance or not, but they hope that they are. And so a whole industry has basically sprung forward in this area, making sure that your compliance is correct, and they sell licenses and they validate licensing. So having dealt with Microsoft License, you hire these guys and you say, man, am I okay? Am I not going to be in trouble? Even they don't know. Most of the time, the recent survey of the licensing VARs, they're not really even sure what they should be charging themselves. And it's getting even weird enough now that Microsoft's kind of starting to eat their own licensed channel partners, and the whole landscape is starting to shift. So I'm picking on Microsoft. This is true for almost every enterprise vendor out there. Just keep an idea on what's going on in the landscape and their current tone of voice and what they're doing. Things can get a little weird, a little quick, especially if you're working on a short budget. Being hit with an audit is always fun. It is really an awful lot of fun staying up all night and counting things. And another thing with the licensing is a lot of companies use this as basically a really interesting, thick club to beat their ways out of the industry and reality. And it's a little bit bizarre because you end up with some companies that'll sit there and they're losing traction in the marketplace or losing traction in the field. And the way they turn to solve this problem is by basically litigation or changing the business agreements. And so I bumped into this back in when virtualization was just starting to kick off, and a lot of enterprise software suites were licensing per core. And as soon as something would jump to a virtualization, they would go, yeah, you can't do it that way. And so it puts an entire halt on a virtualization process that would have been running, and you look at a couple $100,000 worth of time and effort just to get licenses alone, and this one company comes up and says, nah, you're not allowed to, you got to buy physical. It gets a little weird, and then they get very, very threatening about it at times. Not the threatening part, but this happened with a software suite, refused the name, but we eventually got rid of it by moving to MATLAB and R, which were very open to some of these solutions for doing virtualization. This is, back in like 08 or so when it was still kind of cool. But you just got to be careful with some of these things, and now it's happening with the cloud. A lot of things come into, so if you're running Kubernetes and you have 70 to 80-ish things running, what's the licensing implications on that? So there's some interesting areas where it hasn't quite fallen out yet on whether you're looking at burstable traffic or whatnot. So this is all going to kind of shake out as time goes on. But just keep an eye on what you're going to bump into if you're going to run out of compliance real quick, or if they're going to change the name of the game. It's worthwhile keeping an eye out on. This is happening right now with Oracle. Again, apologies to anybody from Oracle. So they changed their licensing with vSphere, and they do not recognize vSphere as a valid virtualization platform for some reason. But you must purchase a license for every single CPU core in your cloud. So it's kind of like buying every seat in a movie theater just in case you happen to sit in one. So this is active, and they're running through this. This is a really bizarre way of treating their customers, but they're doing it right now, and you're seeing a disconnect between the accountants and licensing and the actual solution that they're trying and their customers. Large companies tend to do this sometimes, but it's worthwhile thinking about, especially if you see a company is acting antagonistic towards its own market. You may want to really think twice about adopting it. Not to rag on Oracle, a lot of companies do this. So anyway, just jumping it through, so picking technology, COTS versus do-it-yourself, so commercial off the shelf or putting something together yourself. It's always a fun conversation. So COTS can CYA. It's an unfortunate aspect of daily life today when we make decisions. You usually have to justify that to a certain amount. The fact that you bought it and somebody made it and there's a little piece of paper that says license and warranty sometimes saves your bacon. It's a defensive maneuver. Guys in risk management love this part. Nobody got fired for buying IBM in the 80s. Nobody got fired for buying Microsoft in the 90s. Same kind of deal. So buying commercial software can be very beneficial from a risk-averse situation, especially if you have panicky executives or leadership in charge that you really can't go out on a limb and start doing some interesting things. You can do things that are relatively boring. We'll buy something COTS. Not to say COTS is boring, but I'm just saying sometimes it can CYA. So I wish we didn't have to, but sometimes we do. Do-it-yourself does exactly what you want on the other hand. So this is the solution for every time you want to do something. You can actually build something now that'll address that perfectly. Provided you've done all the requirements right. So this is pretty hard. And provided the business is fully aware and constantly involved for agile methodologies now, and provided that the needs are communicated properly and clearly, and nothing is incorrect, and provided you have some good people, that's always important, and provided that you have the adequate budget to move forward on that. So there's a lot of provideds. Doing something just real quick tends not to be. And do it yourself. It's always a significantly heavier lift than most people can imagine. And I'm victim of that as well sometimes. You think this will just take a couple of weeks, and then 3 or 4 months later you're like, wow, that was actually a lot bigger than I thought it was. So this can be a significant effort, worthwhile thinking twice or even 3 times about. The other thing to keep in mind is that you're on perpetual support. It stays there forever. A lot of companies, even for internal tools, something will be running for a lifetime of 10, 15, potentially 20 years. There's some fun stories coming out about old 286s being bricked up in old server rooms just because they work, and nobody knows where they are, but they're just running. So sometimes these things can continuously go on forever almost. And one of the other things to keep in mind, so you're going to be doing a do-it-yourself lift, and you're not necessarily a software design company. Is this really your core business? This is a really important slide. So this is perhaps one of the most important aspects of technology leadership, period, full stop, is asking this question, and whether or not you're doing the right job by the company and everybody else involved. The sides of the conversation between business and tech is a false dichotomy. Some people say, listen, one's a cost center, one's a profit center, nary the two shall meet. That's completely false. We're all in this together on the tech side and the business side. Saying that there's a distinction between the two is actually, it's a false reasoning. The important thing to keep in mind when doing technology selection in this area with a DIY lift is if you're going to be basically exceeding the relative size of the company itself. I've worked at companies in service role as well as at a company where we're doing a lift, and the IT sector actually exceeds the size of the traditional business, sometimes by a factor of 4 or 5. So I actually know of a company that one of the executives spoke to me afterwards, and he said, we move freight across 2 hemispheres with 13 countries, and we can do all the customs, we handle all the stuff, it's flawlessly, and the IT department is 5 times the size of all of our traditional business combined. So the question comes around, are you really doing is this really your core business? Are they an IT shop, or do they move freight? So this is something, it's an important aspect to technology leadership to be saying, well, is this really what we want to be doing, is this kind of lift? Are we servicing the business correctly? So one of the most important things is being able to say, no, we need to tone this down and take a couple steps back. Jumping quick topic, so let's go back to COTS for a moment. One of the other unfortunate areas of COTS customization is that it really doesn't work very well. So large enterprise software packages, especially in the ERP space, customization almost always fails in one way or the other. It may actually work. You may change processes and customize it to the point where it fits your business well. But what's going to happen is that in the long run, you're actually going to be spending a lot more money to maintain and control the software than it will to actually have done it, just to let it go in the first place. The odd thing is that buying extremely large, this is predominantly talking about the ERP space, it is significantly easier for businesses to adapt to software than it is to adapt software to the business. You may think that you've got an excellent process and it's 100% perfect and it captures exactly what you want to do. but this thing from company Z is not going to fit because somebody over here has got to go and truck this form from A to B, or it's just a bit of a mismatch. And really what it boils down to is that somebody had a 3x5 index card back in '86, and that was the standard thing, and they moved it from department A to department B. And there's really not a whole lot of rhyme or reason on the business reason why X or Y processes exist. It's almost always easier for people to adapt and change because that's what we do as human beings. So one of the things to keep in mind, you're doing customization of COTS security implications, point releases. Every time something goes sideways, you're going to be doing re-verifying all of your customizations against a major megalithic platform and hoping to God it all works. So this is a really bad spiral to get into. And so this is a good slide to kind of harp on a little bit. You got, oh, cool, okay. So, areas and COTS to look into. So the basic one, does it address my critical needs? Is this really what I want? And a lot of people get kind of zazzed by the shiny, nice, and things like that, but it doesn't actually address the critical business need, but man, does it look really good in cornflower. It fits really well with our brand. No, just always keep an idea on the critical needs of the business, what you're trying to accomplish. Areas to keep in mind are the data import and export robustness, how fragile they are, how much work they need to do to get their jobs functioning, the API and how extensible it is to get things done that you need. And to keep an eye on the ecosystem, discussions, partners in this area as well. A lot of the cases, power rules, the 80-20 law tends to be good enough in some of these situations, but they're not 100% to 80-20, 100%. No, okay. It's not a 100% steadfast rule, but these are always things to keep in mind. On the data import-export, check for the hostage moves. A lot of companies are doing this now, especially with everything as a service. AWS is great. Everything's free to get into it. They charge a lot of money to export. So trying to pack up your bags and march from AWS is extremely expensive. And they're very sticky too. So keep an idea on lossage on export. I've seen this as well with some software packages. You feed in all of your business data and all of your customer data, and then at the end you get a summary back as the export if you're trying to move products. It's all fun and games until you lose every line item from every transaction you've ever had, and you've got to stay with them or else. It's a really sneaky way of moving. They would call it having a sticky product, and I call it basically keeping my data hostage. The other thing is just bizarre hidden fees popping up out of the woodwork. So, you want a back button, that's an extra $50 per user. Not too many people are doing this much anymore, but just one of those things to always keep an eye out on the fee schedule. As boring as it is, read the licensing agreement. Again, back to a couple slides ago. And speaking of sticky user systems, a lot of companies are doing this, again, with AWS, not to malign them, but they have everything in the kitchen sink that you would ever possibly want ever. And then once you start to use it, you end up having to rewrite everything again from scratch to jump ship or do parallel execution of multiple cloud providers. So you end up getting stuck inside this one particular area. So this is a favorite way. This is how you capture a market. All of us making decisions for bringing products to market, we all think the same way. It's not something that's really unique to any particular vendor or business vertical. It's something to be very, very much aware of, that once you start getting every little nook and cranny becomes from a particular vendor, you're very much tied to that vendor almost entirely. Be aware of the lift to move. So talking about APIs, so the application programming interface, if we have anybody who's not familiar. So this is how you extend software, make it do things that perhaps were not necessarily designed into it at the time. Keep an eye on this, and this is a technical aspect. This is going to be hard to navigate without somebody who's familiar with software engineering and some of the aspects of the technology. But you can get a good flavor for it, without being too deep and too technical. Is it current? Is it updated? You bump into one and it says copyright 2012. Well, maybe we want to talk about that. So, is it currently moving with the product? Is a good question. Is it thorough? Does it cover everything? What I like to be able to see is that most of the actions that I'm going to be trying to perform are there ways of getting it done. If there isn't, then we have a big issue. But trying to think through some of the business actions that I'm trying to accomplish, can I perform those actions? The things I like to see are actions that I didn't even think about at the time. And you say, why would anybody want to do that to that? That's weird, but I'm glad that somebody thought of it. It shows a relative robustness in design and how inclusive it is, and that they've been listening to their customers. So sometimes you'll see some bizarre one-off, I have no idea why, and what that is a response to a customer demanding a function, which is nice to know that that exists. So sometimes you can see fingerprints left behind in some of these systems, whether or not the company is reactive or not reactive. Vibrant. Okay, I'm sorry. This is not really anything too easy to say. Is it exceedingly well documented? If everybody looked at a Java doc and they just have the name of the function and there's no text in it, nobody spends any time writing doc. You have to document. If I'm going to be consuming this, I want to know that it's worthwhile and that my engineers can use it and I can understand it to a certain extent. It needs to be documented. It needs to have plenty of non-trivial examples. So this is a good fingerprint for an API. It lets you know that you can extend this and get this closer to what you're trying to accomplish in your company. And the other thing is support. Do they answer the phone call about this? And again, I'm going to harp on a company. I love Atlassian a whole lot. They're one of my favorite groups of people. But their APIs are totally not supported. It's so sad when I try to do something. I say, sorry. You just figure it out on your own. So I'd pay for it, but they don't want to take my money. So that's a little bit of a gotcha. If you have questions and they won't answer them, kind of annoying. Even better though, a source license to the original program. And to counterbalance Atlassian, they give you the source code of their products when you buy them. That's fantastic. You can't sell it or give it away, but yeah, you can see every aspect of what it's doing. And then I can basically kind of figure out all the weirdness that's not thoroughly documented. So it's a very good thing to have that available. This is actually even available on some of the major heavy hitters. You can get source code to Windows if you ask very nicely and you're very big, but you can. So sometimes it actually behooves you to ask. The other thing about the ecosystem, make sure it's swiftly moving. Things are happening. Plugins are getting written. Plugins are getting deprecated. People are doing support. Plenty of companies running around. Lots of extensions. And the partners are available and responsive, and there's a lot of them. It's nice seeing a news page where they bring on a couple new platforms. So-and-so's reached platinum level. So-and-so does this, that, or the other. It's nice to see that that's actually moving. If the last news item is from 2010, okay, we might have a bit of a support nightmare coming on our hands. So, don't worry about this. It's all terrible on the inside. So I'm a software engineer by trade. It's all really terrible once you get down into it. Even though this promising enterprise software is just filled with some of the worst code that you can possibly imagine. It's true. So the Windows 2000 source code leak, you have little gems like this that just fill you with confidence in all their enterprise practices. These are the ones that don't have any swear words in them. Things have obviously gotten better since then. No, probably not. And subsequently, we all know what goes on in sales meetings, right? We've all been participating in it. If you haven't, I highly recommend going on one or two just to get a feel for it. The customer says, "Does it do this?" And you say, "Yes, it does. Yes, it does, 100%." And so the same thing happens to you when you're looking at picking up software off the shelf. They say, "Oh yeah, 100%, yeah." And then you can see that one bead of sweat slide down the sales engineer's side. You can try to corner them, but usually they don't let that happen. So go on to some do-it-yourself considerations. One of the main keys of this is just developers. So if anybody, this should ring a bell to some people's heads right now. I don't see if we have a few smiles. Okay, yeah, so this is my friend here, St. Balmer, doing his song and dance number. So developers, the most important thing when doing a do-it-yourself lift. This is the key aspect to this, is getting and retaining good developers, knowing that they're good, which is hard enough, keeping them around, which is harder, and so on and so forth. It really is the lifeblood of any kind of do-it-yourself lift, is getting the engineering, and that includes QA and tests, by the way, so I'm not leaving anybody out, getting this to work correctly and in a well-oiled machine to actually do work. So as I said before, you can build a $1 billion website. That's perfect within all of our capabilities right now. I'm 100% certain we could all do that. Getting something done for $1.95 and a weekend is another question entirely. So, some of the questions to ask yourself, is your language alive and is it cool? Are we building something that's kind of neat? There's a couple places you can go. The TIOB index and PYPL. You can Google, see how things are cool or not. This is a very subjective matter. So you're not going to be able to get a shoestring budget, a bunch of really energized, interesting, happy, young, fresh engineers looking to take on a problem writing SQR for PeopleSoft. Like nobody rolls out of bed and goes, woo, PeopleSoft. So you say something like, dynamic asynchronous node, people go, yeah, let's do it. There's a big difference between some of the perceived interesting and how alive and cool your platform and language is. Just worthwhile. So, I mean, we all get a little older and say like, what we're going to do is we're going to do something in C. And you're like, no, you don't want to. You're not going to get a really strong engineering grab from from the local meetups that way. Is your company and environment set up for an internal dev lift? This is a problem, and it comes down to the question before about, is this really my core competency? Is this really my company's business? I've been party to a departmental rivalry. I've been party to toxic environments, and it comes from people not knowing what's going on, bad communication, there's jealousy involved. All the aspects and elements of human emotion come to play, and they come to play really hard. And this is something that cannot be underestimated at all. So I've been part of an internal dev lift that came to traditional business, and suddenly everybody's really ticked off when they have 15 years of seniority why a bunch of random strangers are basically earning the same amount of money they are down the hall. And what are they doing there? And why are they asking for a ping pong table? Who the hell are these people? It's a really fast way to make a lot of interesting enemies. And it's something to be very considerate of, in a leadership role. This is your job to fix this and to prevent this from happening. It's something to be very much aware of. Dumping a bunch of very, very intelligent people and a ton of money in a traditional business will equal failure, unless it's managed correctly. The other thing is being appreciative of effort. Again, they won't talk to each other. They don't know how each other's businesses work. That has to be communicated. Another interesting thing with do-it-yourself, and we miss this a lot, is complexity increase failure rate. And this is self-evident, but most of the time we miss that now, especially in this realm of hyper horizontal cloud scale, et cetera, et cetera. If you double the number of components, the failure rate goes up 100%. And that's just the way things work. Everything works that way. It's something to be considered about, because unless you're handling all those failures correctly, things are going to go wrong. The idea that web scale is necessary, it's not always true for a small or even medium-sized company. Going through 100,000 transactions a day does not mean you need Google under the hood. This is something that's utterly possible with a MySQL database and a little bit of PHP. So it's something that one or two machines can handle the load quite well and quite naturally. You do not need 15 layers across 4 or 5 data centers. The corollary to this is that growing into your problems is super important, right? Designing them up front is very, very painful. So when you have the problem where you can't withstand the load, that's a great problem to have, right? I love having that problem so very much. Having a system crumble under 10 or 15 users, no, not so much, because there's so many moving parts and they're all glued together in interesting ways. Don't forget that you can always start small. Distributed systems are very hard. So if anybody thinks they're not, you could read up on Paxos and the Byzantine general problem. My God, is it hard. So just driving this point home, complexity equals complexity. So the bigger things are, the faster they'll go down south. The faster the bugs can figure out where to hide. A slide I wish I could spend a lot more time on, security implications. Keep an eye on some of the ingress path and data exfiltration. This is much more important now that everybody's data has basically been leaked to almost God knows everywhere else. So I think the entire country of Turkey went recently, and most of the Philippines, the citizen data just got leaked online. Of course we lost OPM, which was really funny with the DoD. Exfiltration and ingress path, keep an eye on your security, the attack surface that you may present. This is a very hard point, but it's also important to keep an eye on. Buying anything, building anything, you're never as smart as a dedicated 17-year-old Uzbekistani kid who's got a lot of time on his hands and you happen to be there. just be aware of what's going to be going on and mitigate this. So there are tons of examples online that you can read through, cert advisories, et cetera. Just be aware of this. This is not something you can just forget about and walk past. And one other thing to keep an eye out for, pinning your hopes on the future. So hoping beyond hope that somebody's going to release 1.0 at the right moment and everything's going to be perfectly fine. Unless you have a very strong legal binding and you know where they live, that's not going to happen. Almost all the time the schedules slip. I'm sure we've all seen that somewhere. But schedules always slip, agreements always tend to get a little tenuous. Pinning your hopes on a moving platform, even worse if they don't know who you are, is always dangerous. Make sure you build it into your risk analysis. It's something to keep an eye on. Another one, this is near and dear to my heart, and I've done this a couple times. So painting yourself into a theoretical corner. Know when you can back out of R&D. So you're building something, you're doing a lift, and you're proceeding down a path, and know when your cutoff is, know when your budget hits, and then try to stick to that as much as humanly possible. We all have a problem, being aware of when the payoff time is, and especially if that starts to move. But the thing to keep you aware of is it's called the sunk cost fallacy, and we all should be very much aware of that. Be able to cut your losses and have a plan B is one of the most effective strategies I've seen dealing with any of these technology things, and it was taught to me quite strongly, and I love always having a backup just in case. But beware, if something says 2 or 3 days and 2 or 3 weeks later, you may want to start looking at executing plan B, just in case. The sunk cost fallacy is hard to avoid. I'm sure we've all been there once or twice in Atlantic City, but yeah, it's something to definitely keep an eye out for. And the other thing is looking for the latest and the greatest. So, operations always know service pack 1 is what you wait for. So immediately rushing out to a brand new technology sometimes can result in a little bit of failure as you end up beta testing essentially what comes out of any company's release pipeline. It's worthwhile just thinking about being the first early adopter, especially if it ends up being business critical. But especially when you're doing virtualization nowadays, all this does is take time. If you can get the people to devoted to doing some investigation onto it and experimentation, it just takes time now, and it doesn't require any kind of capital expenditure to move forward on some of these things. So keep in mind that now, with full virtualization and now the cloud, a lot of these things can be something that you can just play around with and start to understand the landscape of before you even begin to move it into any kind of staging or production area. And one of the other things that I've personally bumped into is beware of free gifts. This is insidious, but you should always keep an eye out for it. So one time we got a free application platform, and it didn't work, and we didn't have time to switch. So gifts from boards of directors. My cousin knows this guy who's he's got a few licenses of X, Y, or Z, and maybe you haven't heard of it, but I'm sure it's good. Beware of anything that's basically given out for utterly free, especially if it's a pretty big product. When we got this thing, we basically got 0 support. And whatever support we could beg for from the original company was just people who were sitting on the bench killing time. And so every single time you'd call, you'd get a different person. This is the most expensive free gift I've ever been given. So it saved us about, I think, $100,000, and then it cost us about $1 million afterwards. And eventually ended with the failure of the technology lift at the time. So it'd be a lot better just being able to pick something and pay for it ahead of time. So, whenever something comes free from my neighbor who knows a guy, these speakers in this van, they're totally, it's excess inventory. Just back away slowly and look at it critically. And one of the things, am I getting close to time? I'm getting close to time. 10 minutes? Okay. Getting eaten by your ecosystem. And this is, again, it's become bitterly poignant today in today's everything as a service. Running around with your ecosystem, sometimes the ecosystem itself will just devour your company. So not to rag on AWS, but AWS. So a lot of their premier platinum partners get eaten by Amazon. They basically offer a version of the entire company for about $0.01 less per hour, and then the company goes out of business. It's a very popular move in the 90s, announcing your own product to compete with an existing channel partner or someone like a platinum partner. If you play in this space offering a unique service that solves a problem inside of an ecosystem, if you're doing a very interesting piece of cloud analytics, if you're doing a very interesting piece of user management, or X or Y or Z for a particular vertical, always be wary if they're hungry and they come by and they actually physically eat you. And they'll just come up with some kind of product that's close enough for about $1 less, and the market will take care of it for itself. And you will not be able to compete against a juggernaut who owns the ecosystem. Nobody will go and buy, Bob's custom databases in the realm of RDS. Like it's not gonna happen. So it's something to be aware of. That goes heavily in your risk idea of launching things. There we go. Inside of an ecosystem that's actively moving like that. So I know of a couple companies that were kind of unfortunate about that, and I think Citrix got zapped a couple AWS keynotes ago when they announced remote desktop for AWS, so cheaper than Citrix. And so the other thing is keeping an idea on what's hot and what's not. Riding the wave of cool and awesome and amazing and interesting and delicious and really, really fun is great, except when you fall off, or the technology proves untenable, or it doesn't scale, or there's some hilarious new bug associated with it. So the wave is nice. It's great to attract talent, which is one of the biggest pitfalls in this area of technology, is getting the right talent and getting that talent energized and motivated to be able to succeed correctly. Like I said, nobody jumps out of bed for writing SQR in PeopleSoft. Well, some people do, but not everybody. But getting too far down a blazingly hip piece of technology sometimes come around, right around and bite you in the rear end at times. Blind faith in technology leads to unfortunate things at times. We're all fallible human beings. Again, distributed systems, one of my big favorite faves. When things go sideways, it's always somewhere in some kind of protocol that gets dropped somewhere, and Lord knows you'll never find it. It just takes forever. But yeah, so keep an idea on some of the newest, hippest, most interesting technologies tend to be some of the least thoroughly vetted, and sometimes the least applicable to enterprise space as well. So I think we are getting close to time. So I'm actually I have a couple slides, but I will skip that. And so conclusion. So I'm predominantly talking about things that negatively affect me in my life. So this is a bit of a pessimistic talk. I hope everybody comes away from this maybe a little bit wiser in the next day. This all sounds bad. It isn't. This is not all doom and gloom. These are things to keep an eye out for. But I've had a lot of great successes doing technology selection. Some of them were non-trivial. Some of them I stick my neck out for, and they work fantastic. So I mean, chewing through a DUKPT implementation when it runs 5 weeks over a 2-day budget, that's especially when I launched 4 weeks ago. That's a bit of a rough thing, and it paid off in spades, and that was awesome. Switching to R and NumPy from SAS paid off in spades. All risky maneuvers, but abandoning existing product lines for something unknown to try to solve a problem can be some of the most rewarding aspects of our technology selection and being in technology leadership and software architecture today. It's a fantastic job. I love it. And I wish you all the best in doing selection. I hope I haven't brought anybody down too far with this, but there's fantastic things out there, and the only way we can learn is by making mistakes. And I hope that you learn a little bit from some of the ones that I've bumped into. So thank you very much. I haven't scared anybody else either. Great, thank you very much. So if anybody has any questions, comments, happy to answer any questions, criticism, even that criticism's fine. So, class dismissed. Thank you very much.